To go. Hello, everybody. Thanks
Great,
for
great.
having me, first off. So I'm just going to bring this up in 2 seconds. Just for the record, I am in the Colombian Amazon. And so my internet might glitch out. If it does, my trusty friend Prach is here, our ecology lead, to take over for me.
So far,
So
all is great. We hear you well.
thank God bless Starlink. Say what you will about Elon Musk's business practices, but he did make a really good satellite internet. Okay, great. So today, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good to go. So my presentation today is about bringing suitable carbon credits into your business model. This whole thing started with a naked jaguar. This is Johnny's jaguar. It actually has a name, and it lives in the Colombian Amazon. And Johnny fell in love with it, and he stopped growing cocaine for the narco traffickers, and he stopped hunting, and he turned into a conservationist. And we studied Johnny as a way of getting into the climate market. And I think what really interested me about Johnny is, why did he do this? Because there was a lot of economic and social pressure not to do this. And if you think about it, I thought about it for probably 6 months. I think Johnny was motivated to make this change because the jaguar was absolutely beautiful. It was wild, and it was bigger than him. And that's the way I feel about my company, my project, Savimbo, and that's the way that people at Savimbo feel about our planet. Climate change is a huge problem, $23 trillion by current estimates, because the world used to look like the left, and now it looks like the right. And it's our biggest problem, it's our children's biggest problem, and it's probably going to be our children's biggest problem. Just who I am, so because you guys are listening to me, I'm an MD technologist. I do high tech for hard science. I started out in forest fires, grew up off the grid, started out 9 years in forest fires, moved into medicine and surgery, and then went into ethnobotany, kind of fell off the deep end and started working on hard problems using high tech and emerging markets. So I created a consulting agency. We call ourselves Delinquent Savants, 300 high IQ consultants solving hard scientific and social problems using emerging technology and hard science. The most interesting consult we ever got was from 5 medicine doctors in the Colombian Amazon that asked us to stop the deforestation in their lands. And we created our current project, which is Savimbo. We sell fair trade carbon credits. This talk isn't so much about me selling you carbon credits. I want you to be empowered when you look at the climate market, when you talk to people about climate, and I want to debunk a little bit of the myths about climate and about carbon credits. So this is more about you. There's 3 principles that I wish I'd understood when I got into this market. And it really, over the years working in this, I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on them, and I want you to have a good grasp on them too. The first thing is that it's a new market. It's only been around for about 20 years, and we're only really tackling this problem now, unfortunately. The second thing is that in this market, the talk to action ratio is totally broken, and we'll go into that more in detail. And the last thing is, and this I think is not well understood, is that there's still pretty poor science in this market. So let's talk about those 3 things. We're still figuring out this market. Nobody really knows what they're talking about. And that's why you always see these big exposés, John Oliver and The Guardian. It's very easy to criticize in this market, and it's a lot harder to figure out what to say and how to do it right. I feel like it's not only a new market, so a little bit of the chaos that we saw in blockchain over the last few years is happening in carbon. Also, it's a legislated market, so it's being artificially pushed past normal development cycles. We saw this with EMR, where it was legislated, everybody had to start using it, but it was really not well developed, and there was all kinds of chaos after it was implemented. The last thing is that it is still emerging science. Our scientific models are linear, not complex. They are not well suited for climate. And so a lot of the arguments you see in the market are about the science, which is still pretty poor. This market is driven by laws. There's 194 companies enrolled in the Paris Accords. That's a legally binding agreement with very little effects to lower global temperatures by 2050. And right now, there's also lawsuits in The Hague. So countries like Vanuatu, small countries that might be underwater due to climate change in a few years, are now suing developed nations for too much talk and too little action. So we're probably going to see a lot more legal restrictions on emissions in the future. And this is the compliance versus the voluntary market. Currently, the legislated market, like airlines and California and a lot of people in Europe, are mandated by law to buy or reduce their emissions. And then there's the voluntary market where people don't really have to do it. They can just talk about it. And if they don't do it, there's really no consequences. And that's the two sides of the market. This market has way more talk than action. We use this graphic to talk about it. I'm sure you guys have heard all the time 2015 net zero goals. You probably heard a lot of things about ESG reports, corporate social responsibility, sustainable jargon. People use all kinds of fancy words to talk about what they're doing and to sound smarter than they need to be. And then I've probably seen 1,000 events and very little action. My whole goal with my life is if I can make that drop just a little bit bigger with my project. And I think that if the focus on action is incredibly important. Here we see that we are not meeting our climate goals because we have been talking more than doing. Pre-Paris Accords, we probably would have ended up here. Right now, we're doing a little bit better. We have promised to do the pale green line. And what we really need to do is the blue line. There are tipping points on our planet. It is not as simple as a press release is going to solve the problem. There are real hard science problems. We live in a biodome, and there are a number of tipping points that we're reaching climatically and as far as deforestation that could really hurt us. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But basically, not acting is not an option. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why it's been hard to do it in the past and why I think we could do better in the future. Because I am not a pessimist. I'm very much an optimist. Okay, so the first thing is whenever we see bad science or a lot of scientific dog bites in the market, then it's usually because we have the wrong paradigms. And here's an example. This is a nonlinear observation, and somebody has drawn a line through it. And you can see the line kind of where we're going to be, but not entirely. It's a little bit off. The problem with climate is that we're not only not linear, we're not exponential. Climate deals with fractal patterns. Nature is fractal and it has much more complex patterns. And when we try and measure it, we do a very poor job because we're still trying to draw a line through a pattern like that. Also, we have something called an N of 1. We only have one Earth to study. We like to look at other stars. We think we have an idea about what's going on there, but they're so far away, we don't really know. And so when we try and figure out what we're going to do with our one planet, it's very hard for us to figure out. There's not a statistical average. And the last thing is we have not valued our climate science. Climate scientists have not been well paid. It was not a desirable job career 10 years ago. Kids were going into computer science. They weren't going to go become ecologists. We're just really, really understaffed for the people that we need in this project right now, which is why people like me and my group are switching disciplines into climate because it's important and we have the capacity to do so. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about chaos theory. And I know you guys did not come to a chaos theory presentation, but I think it's really important. And I'll explain why as simply as possible. There are simple problems like this toy here on the right. They have sequential steps in parallel, and it's like baking a cake from a box. They have instructions and you do one at a time. That's a simple problem. Giving a vaccination is another thing. I won't go into detail in case anybody has needle phobia. A complicated problem is a little bit more difficult. So it's multiple components with if-then algorithms. If this happens, then you do that. If this happens, you do that. You could think about working in a call center, but even sending a rocket ship to the moon is a complicated problem. Diagnosing a urinary tract infection in medicine. A complex problem is different. It has fractal patterns. It has emergent properties. Raising a child is a complex problem. You can do everything right, and your child can still end up in prison for graffitiing a church, who knows? But you can do everything wrong, and your child might end up being a Nobel Peace Prize winner. It's not as simple as a one-to-one thing. Preventing obesity in a population is a complex problem. It's not a simple one-to-one ratio, and it's not an algorithm. Chaos theory is the study of complex problems. So it's a field in mathematics, but they've used it all over the place: meteorology, sociology, physics, engineering, economics, biology, and philosophy. We use chaos theory in climate. The reason we use chaos theory in climate is because climate has something called butterfly effects. A chaotic system is a dynamic system. and it has sensitive to initial conditions. And with a very small thing like a butterfly flapping its wings, you can create a huge monsoon across the world. And if you understand chaos theory and you apply it in climate, which is a complex system, then you can have exponentially vast changes. So I'll just go into this really quick. Complex system. See if this sounds to you like a climate system. It's dynamic, never stays still, always moving. It's open. In other words, it has things coming in and things going out. Limited knowledge. In other words, you don't know everything about the system. You don't know what's 50 miles underneath the Earth's crust or even what's in the deep ocean. Path dependency, one Earth, one history. What you started with and what you end with is very different. Asteroids hitting one planet. Feedback, not positive or negative feedback loops like greenhouse gas warming. Tipping points with quantum change. This is the most important part, and this is what I want you to take away. It can absorb large changes, massive changes, huge amounts of CO2, but it can be disrupted by tiny changes. That's an important property of a complex system, and we use that to help climate instead of hurting it. Okay, so the takeaway here I want you guys to understand is that the science is bad because it's nonlinear relationships, and we're still using linear science in almost everything we're doing with climate. It's impossible to predict. We don't know what's going to happen because it's a complex system. The effects are not proportionate to the stimuli. Very small changes can have very big climate effects. Anticipate quantum change. With chaotic systems, they don't change slowly, they change very fast. And it's a complete state change. And they have things called emergent opportunities and malleable moments, which means that you can make small differences that make a huge impact. Okay, I swear I'm done with the really nerdy stuff, and now I'm going to get into like basics, and so you guys can like take some stuff away. Okay, any questions up till now?
I've just got one, Drea, and
Yeah.
it's great that you're here. And then there'll be a few more afterwards once you finish your presentation.
Sure.
So I'm just putting it out there. What if we just don't care about the climate?
Oh, okay, wait, I have a really good answer for that. Let me circle back to that because I think that's really important. Like too many people, okay, I'll talk about it now and I'll talk about it later too. Too many people are totally burnt out on climate. And I think what it comes down to is it's so big. If you can't do something about it, then how are you going to have any action? And I think people do this all the time. They're like, well, I'm going to die someday. I'm not going to think about it today. I'm just going to go to work, take care of my kids, and eat my lunch. And so climate has been kind of put into that bucket for a lot of people. What I want to do is demystify it, make it super simple, and make it small and actionable so that it's no longer this huge problem you can't do anything about. And then you might find that you might care about it a little bit more.
That's great.
Okay. It's kind of like going on a diet. You're like, I'm going to diet someday. I will lose 10 pounds and I won't do it. But then somebody puts a delicious diet fruit in front of you, like hummus, and you're like, shit, I can diet right now. I'm eating hummus. Like, it's not that hard. And so what I want to do is put some hummus in front of you. Okay. Or Starbucks made that really skinny macchiato that was delicious. And I was like, well, I can easily switch now. So I think there's a lot of things like that in climate right now. And I want you guys to be empowered to take advantage of them. Okay. So here is 3 things that work for climate. And then I want you guys to like think about these and then look for small, simple ways like your macchiato or your hummus that you can just do. You don't have to do this huge diet where you're in a bender. Okay, so first thing is nature works. Second thing is deforestation matters. It's not just tree huggers on the Amazon that care about deforestation anymore. And the last one is ecology is really important when you're buying carbon credits. Okay, so there's all kinds of arguments about why the Earth is heating up. You probably heard the climate debate. Honestly, there is a little bit of scientific debate as to, is it heating up because of greenhouse gases or is it heating up because of natural warming trends? I think it's a little bit like the 2-year-old in the kitchen with the broken glass. They're like, hey, mommy, I'm just standing next to this broken glass. We probably did it because CO2 levels have looked like this for most of history, and now they look like that. And we know that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and it started shooting up around the time the cars showed up. And so as a result, we're probably responsible. And I think more importantly, it's the one target that we can do something about. When we talk about carbon credits, everybody's heard this term, but it can be super confusing. It should not be confusing. It should be, everybody should understand what it is. It is 1 metric ton of CO2, and it is stored or removed. It's either not emitted to the atmosphere or it's taken out of the atmosphere. And it has to be taken out of the atmosphere for between 30 to 100 years. So not just temporarily and then put right back. A carbon credit, by the time it's a carbon credit, is fungible, which means that you can buy and sell it. It's basically the dollar of the environment right now. And it has to be certified by an independent body. If somebody's selling you a carbon credit that's not certified, they need to explain clearly why they haven't done that, because these certifying bodies are what make a carbon credit valid or not. Everybody asks me, like, emissions, reduce carbon. We need to do both. It's not either or. Some people are better at doing one or the other. So if you look at climate companies and stuff like that, ask yourself, are they stopping these emissions, which is good to do, or are they pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, which is also good to do? And if you're a company, look at what you can do. So some companies, like aluminum factories, they can't stop emitting. We will either stop using aluminum, they will be emissions. And so in their case, they would pay somebody else to take that carbon back out of the atmosphere as part of their business model. But other companies, like electronics companies, they might be able to get down to 0 emissions, and that's a really good idea for them. I still think everybody has a responsibility to try and invest in carbon reduction projects as well and nature enhancing, but that's my personal soapbox. So when you're talking about carbon credits, you can have an emissions credit. And emission credits are hotly debated, but also necessary. So if you say I did not emit a lot into the atmosphere, you could pay me for that. And I have put extra money into my processes or something like that. And I've made things more efficient. You would get a credit for that. I think it's necessary, but it's a little bit like saying, hey, I am not going to pollute the air in this room. What are you going to pay me for that? And then saying how much pollution you had inside of yourself. They get debated in the market for a good reason. At the end of the day, everybody's going to have to stop emitting so much. And the question is, do we really need to pay them to do that? Or do we need to charge them if they do? The next one is direct air capture. This is scientifically fairly invalid. You probably hear from a lot of people, we're building better machines to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. They're not, and here's why. The technology is simply not there. The parts per million that carbon is at in the atmosphere is about 419 parts per million. The only way that people can pull carbon out of the air is if it's in the parts per million it's at in a smokestack, like a coal-fired power plant where it's 12% carbon. In that case, they have the technology to pull it out of the air, and they should, but even more importantly, they should stop doing coal-fired power plants. So direct air capture is not a good technology. I do not recommend it. And I think that more people need to be educated on the fact that it is a future technology. So it's possible, technically and economically challenging. It is extremely dilute concentration of atmospheric CO2. Probably machines are not going to save us. We need to challenge the idea that we have to do less now because we can do more later with techno fixes. This is a very dangerous idea, especially when we have stuff we can target now. Because trees have already been invented and they work. Trees and algae can pull carbon out of the atmosphere in the parts per million it's in. When you talk about trees and algae, the problem is markets. So trees and algae both can pull carbon out of the atmosphere, but it's very, very hard to quantify algae. Algae is in a flux. It's absolutely beautiful. The ocean is a big place and we can probably do some amazing stuff, but it's very hard for us to fund that directly, as in it's a carbon credit. We don't know where that algae necessarily went, and it's hard to track carbon in the ocean. And so the markets have really congealed around land credits, which is trees planted, basically. And I can go more into that later if there's more questions. These land credits, most of the credits being sold are either emissions reduction or trees, nature-based solutions, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. And this market is exploding pretty much out of control. It's gone up 2 times in the last 2 years, according to Bloomberg. And 1 ton of carbon in the form of a carbon credit could be worth as much as $225 a ton by 2029. Currently, it's worth about between $1 to $6 to 12.5, depending on where you're at. The last thing is deforestation matters. A lot of people just want to focus on carbon, but we also need to focus on deforestation, and I'll tell you why. if you look at all the land carbon in the world, the majority of it is at the center of the equator. So it's stored in tropical forests with fairly weak central government. Congo, the Amazon, Papua New Guinea. These are areas that have been historically impoverished, but they hold the most carbon per hectare of land. Just the Amazon stores 25% of the world's land carbon. And as you can see at the bottom here, it's getting hugely deforested. The problem with deforestation in the Amazon is Amazon has a local rain cycle that keeps the trees wet and stores the carbon kind of above the ground. And so the trees will kind of evapotranspirate this water and they will cycle it back and forth. When you cut the trees down, they stop evapotranspirating and it stops the local rain cycle, and then the trees can burn, emitting the carbon that they've stored into the atmosphere. This is in addition to our current emissions. So the risk of deforestation is that we will completely lose, we will actually add to our land carbon. Sorry, I have a hard time turning that one off. We will actually add to our land carbon in addition to the emissions that we already have. If you look at where deforestation is happening in tropical forests, in the Congo and in the Amazon, we see this. It looks like it's happening along roads, and we think it might be institutional logging. But if you look a lot closer, it's actually not. It's usually small farmers, subsistence farmers, who are cutting down 5 hectares, 10 hectares. And most of our interventions are institutional, so they don't address small farmers. And we do know from Brazil that if you control institutional logging, but you fail to address small farmers, they will fill the gap with illegal logging. And we're seeing that in the Congo. So deforestation initiatives are really important. It's not just about pulling carbon out. It's also about keeping the cooling effects of local rainfall from big forests. Okay, last one. If you are buying carbon credits, it is really important that you buy carbon credits that are not just a carbon credit, because as we talked about, it could just be like one of those I didn't fart in the room carbon credits. I think it's a little bit more important to buy carbon credits with something they call ecological benefits. So it's not just reducing carbon, it's where you reduce the carbon and how you did it. So here's an example of our project in the Colombian Amazon. We work on deforestation. We work with small farmers directly, and that's our project. I don't know how well that's coming up. And then, hang on. And then the next thing is carbon credits with ecological benefits include things. If you think about an ecosystem, it's not just one slice for the system, like a carbon credit slice. It's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 slices. So you're also looking at the integrity of the biodiversity, which tells you a lot about, is it a forest or is it just a bunch of non-native bamboo trees that somebody planted because they grow really fast? So biodiversity slice through the carbon credit will help a lot. Equity is really important. Like I said, these tropical forests, most of the people who live there have been excluded from carbon credit markets in the past. Our project is really bullish on employing locals and then paying small farmers directly who own private land. But other projects have other ways of enhancing equity. I've been talking to people in Gabon who are working with indigenous groups, etc. And then water is really important. It's not just about the carbon, it's also about the integrity of the ecosystem. So waterways and water rights help with emissions. And then the last one is, so this one I think is talking about soil and soil capture. You can put carbon into biochar and store it in the soil, which lasts for about 500 years. And air. We measure dragonflies to measure air quality. And then the last one is agrobiodiversity crops. So tree-based local crops that are sustainably harvested and sold, like Chantajuro, can make a huge difference in not only deforestation, but also sustainable living with keeping forests intact. So, okay, I'm almost done here and then we'll go to questions. You can be part of the solution, and here's why. The 2 best players in the market right now are Microsoft and Stripe. They don't have a lot of emissions. So they're not buying huge amounts of cheap carbon tons just to keep their business model afloat. They have the option to really go in and buy interesting projects. And they are promoting, like I said, the butterfly effect. They're promoting small projects with ecological benefits, small amounts of carbon credits, but the highest quality ones. And they are funding the technological innovation in the field as clients who care. I don't believe either one of them are regulated right now. They might be if they're in California. But because they are not regulated and have an interest in the field, They've really funded development. And what I'm hoping is that you guys will end up in this bucket of clients. So I'll tell you a little bit about our project and then I'm done. Okay, so the project started 3 environmental friends. Johnny on the left, a conservationist with the Jaguar. Me in the center, who sometimes takes a bath. Fernando on the right, 3rd generation Colombian shaman. All of us decided we had a bonding moment about conservation. We decided we wanted to get people paid for it. This is Johnny talking about his 20-year advocacy with the World Wildlife Fund and other big controlling mining companies, controlling controlling petroleum companies, and never getting paid for it once in his whole life. And this is where he lives at the end of a deforestation corridor, protecting this huge forest behind him. These are Johnny's neighbors, who basically thought Johnny might have been crazy until we started paying him. And this is 27 men representing 27 different families in the area, and they live right next to Johnny, and they've joined our project. This started mostly as a joke between me and Johnny. I was like, I'll pay you $5. And before we knew it, it started growing out of control. So we got the mayor involved, local community people, a lot of on-site refining and agile development. And now we have a transacting business model to stop deforestation.
I don't know if you can hear us.
Crops.
We did lose you. We did lose you slightly then.
Okay, where should I go back to?
Just to the deforestation piece. Just the beginning of this slide when you. Yeah, the next slide. Yeah, beginning of this slide. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So we have carbon credits. We sell fair trade carbon credits. We also have fair trade biodiversity credits. We do agro biodiversity crops, so native superfoods that can be sold outside of the Amazon and collected in the forest without disrupting them. Clean water preservation. So if dragonflies are attacked over waterways and there's primary forest, it protects the Amazon downstream. And then very selective ecotourism. We have an application only program, and we say it's a little bit like climbing Everest. You got to come prepared and really love your Sherpa. We have 81 families enrolled, about 3,400 hectares so far, and we're growing virally on the ground. And then here's our project and where it's spread to. So we bring in large land collectives, indigenous groups, and small farmers in the area. So this is our Twitter feed if you want to see some more naked jaguars. And other than that, I think you guys can ask me questions. What do you got?
So we've got some questions, Dre, and then anyone else that's on, just feel free to ask. So you talked about there's a lot around the Amazon and around tropical forests, but how could we reduce the carbon in a desert climate? Has that been looked at? Yeah,
that is a great question. There are 2 things that I think, because a lot of the group in Gleek is in Dubai, and I spent about 6 months in Dubai over the last couple of years, and I really love 2 things. The first one is I love, there's something called breathable sand, which is a technology that's eco-friendly, and it's a sand that's been treated and it holds more water. So you get 80% survival rate in desert trees. It can also preserve water runoff from cities in desert countries like Saudi Arabia and Dubai. That is an amazing technology. Happy to nerd out about that with you if you ever want. The other thing is I really think Saudi Arabia, Dubai, UAE, that area should look at biochar. Because if you take your industrial waste and you convert the organic material into biochar, you can put it into desert sands and it enriches the sand. And I think eventually you could end up with a topsoil. And I really do think that is possible. Yeah, I think you're going to need to lead the way on that one. I'm a huge fan of biochar. I really think all the desert nations to start using it to create topsoil. It's a pretty easy fix, and it stores carbon for 500 years. So it would be an entirely subsidized technology. With the 2 technologies, you could not only create topsoil and plants, but you could probably farm them in a desert climate.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So Drea, I've got a question for you. It's maybe a bit of a different vein. And then for the audience, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat. We're keeping an eye out, so go for it. My question is, do you ever feel depressed about the climate?
I used to, and I think it just came down to what could I do about it? When I heard about it before, I mean, I've always been a lover of nature. I grew up embedded with nature. I spent 9 years working full-time in remote areas. But loving nature and feeling like you can protect it are 2 different things. And I think that it's so big, it was really frustrating. When I found this project, I found something very small and actionable that made a big difference. I found a butterfly effect.
That's amazing. So, on that note, I'm sure a lot of people here are doing a whole bunch of different things, but on a personal level, what can someone do?
Which means that you might be able to come up with something really small that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Sorry, can you repeat that, Drea? I lost you for just a second.
Oh yeah, sorry. Starlink's good, but not that great. Yeah, so I think that it's very important to look for butterfly effects in this field.
Right.
And then that helps a lot with depression too, because there's such small changes. I think a couple of times in my life, I've made big climate changes that didn't feel that hard. So I used tiny habits to do behavior change. I switched to cycling. I lost 10 pounds and reduced my emissions by a ridiculous amount. But that, so you can do small things in your own life and then in your friends' lives. And like this project for me is actually a pretty small move, but it's had a massive effect.
Right. Yeah. Great.
I have a question for Drea.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Drea, I live in the US, and there's this is a divisive topic here, right? Because there's sort of half of us who believe that, climate change is the real thing and the other half doesn't. And the people who don't normally say that, look, there's enough research. I mean, there's research to prove that there is climate change, and there is research to prove there isn't climate change. So my question to you was, is there research to say that climate change is not happening? Is there data to support their point of view?
No, it's undeniable. If you really want to look at the good science, the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii has readings of global temperatures and they have readings of CO2. And there's a lot of very good hard science. We are not only experiencing climate change, it's costing conservative states like Texas billions of dollars a year, which I find highly entertaining. So I think that the more expensive it gets, the more people are going to care more about it. The question becomes, is it too late by then? I'll give you an example. There was a snowstorm in Texas, which is pretty anti-climate action. There was a snowstorm in Texas last year that cost the state, I think it was like $1 billion just in lost revenue and things shutting down and stuff like that. And so it's getting harder to deny.
I marvel at is the fact that they speak with as much of conviction as people who believe that climate change is happening. And I wonder where this data is coming from. And I actually Googled it, trying to look at, where is this data that says that this is, a natural power progression of the Earth's stay of this, in our galaxy. It's not, but I didn't find any. So I was wondering if there is data.
There is data to show like heating and warming cycles on the Earth's crust. So there's data to show that like the Arctic poles have expanded and contracted. And there's an argument among scientists, and I don't think it's relevant, that the Earth might be heating up unrelated to CO2.
Correct. Well,
and I think that is a entirely valid hypothesis for something that's nearly impossible to prove. The question is, what could we do about it? And it comes back to CO2. We do know that we have created an exponential rise in CO2. We know that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. And so if we can do something about that, we should. And it's not just CO2 that's a problem. Pretty much every chemical cycle is out of balance due to industrial activities.
Correct, because as you mentioned, topsoil is a major problem. It's about adding fertilizers, and there are things that can be done. As
nitrogen in the waterways from farming. I mean, there's so much that we have done in such a short period of time. The best book on the topic that I've ever read is called Biogeochemistry. It takes this field of biology, the field of geology, and the field of organic chemistry. It puts them together and it looks at the Earth as an organism. And if you look at if you look from that perspective, which is a much more advanced scientific perspective, then you start to see cycles getting exponentially out of control. And they all coincide with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, which I don't think anybody wants to go away from flushing toilets. I live in the Amazon, and I can tell you for a fact, I don't. I like hot showers and flushing toilets. I think we've done some really good things with human health. It's just a matter of continuing along that trend and getting better with our ecology footprint as well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ritu. So Salas in the audience has asked the question. Thank you, Salas. Why don't you present this during our COP28 being hosted in Dubai to big techies, decision makers, to influence their decisions?
I'm happy to come. I suspect I'll get mixed up in COP28 6 ways from Sunday. I normally avoid climate conferences, but I'll make an exception for that one.
Gleek are going to be there, so you should come as one of our ambassadors.
I'm really happy for Dubai hosting that. I think I don't know, is it Dubai or Abu Dhabi? I know there was a fight over it.
Dubai. This is Dubai.
Yeah, okay, Dubai won recently. Okay, well, I think that whoever hosted in the UAE has a very energetic and youthful attitude to a lot of problems. And I feel like if the UAE got interested in climate, they could make such big inroads in such a short amount of time. I really hope that they do.
And then just another one, which removal technology do you feel is the most scientifically valid? So I know you like to geek out and you're quite nerdy. You're quite nerdy.
Okay, so I've already explained why I think trees are necessary, not just because it's because of that additional potential emission of the entire Amazon forest and because of local rainfall cycles, which are cooling to the Earth's crust. So trees are great, deforestation is good. You can also make the argument that you cannot grow enough trees and there's not enough land to grow enough trees to solve the entire problem. The secondary technology that I'm a huge fan of and we're implementing on our site is biochar. So take organic material, you char it, it stores carbon for up to 500 years, and it can be used as a topsoil fertilizer. And there's evidence that this has been happened before on massive scales throughout the Amazon. Other ancient farming communities have used biochar for organic fertilizer. It also helps with water quality. It helps with nutrient content in soil. Like, it's amazing. So huge fan of biochar. The technology's there. It just needs to be implemented more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to ask a question? We do have a few more here if people are a bit shy. Okay. Okay.
I'm going to close with one thing and then I don't know. Do we have more time? I've got more information if you guys want.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. How much time do we have?
So
Go for it.
Or should we finish
we're
early?
good. We're good.
We've got about 10 to 15 minutes before we start wrapping up. So Drea.
Okay. All right. I'll give you some nerdy stuff. I didn't know if we'd have enough time for it and I wanted to make sure we cover questions. Okay. So I'll talk to you guys about the carbon credit pipeline, my personal. Oh, sorry, was that a question?
Sorry, there's someone. Do you have a question or is any? Oh no, is any? If you could go on.
Okay. Thank you very much. I want to ask. What are the environmental practices that we can partake? We can take part in within our environment to combat the climate change related issues.
Talking permitted.
So there's all kinds of small things. So you're asking what you can do in your environment?
Yes. What are those things that we can participate within our environment so that we can able to remove carbons within ourselves, within the environment we are living?
I think it depends on where you live, and a lot of good ecological action is localized. So in the US, for instance, reducing single-use plastics with like single-use straws is a really big thing that you can do. And it's small. Any small business can do it, any restaurant. You could even do it in your personal house. I stopped buying plastic spoons a while ago and started buying those like plant-based spoons. And I was like so happy they compost. So stuff like that can be small in the US. If you're in a developing nation, just planting a tree doesn't take that much work. And tropical trees can grow to full standing height in 6 years and live for 300 years. A tree reduces 40 tons of carbon, about.
Is it me or did we lose Drea? Okay.
Of known solutions that have been implemented in Europe and the US. They might be expensive, but you could find things that aren't so expensive. I don't know if I have my internet still here. If you are just an average consumer living in Dubai or UAE, taking public transit, cycling, making other small changes can make a huge difference just in your personal footprint. And lastly, if you're influential at your place of work, then businesses can make a huge difference. Like I said, Stripe and Microsoft are driving so much innovation in the field just by being a little bit more thoughtful about which credits they buy and who they buy it from. I do have to give a plug for my people. We have a subscription service. You can subscribe to one of my small farmers for $20 a month. And their land, each hectare stores 800 tons of carbon, which is they pull out of an international air circuit. And you can stop deforestation, and you also can preserve jaguars and biodiversity. That's some of the densest biodiversity in the world. Okay, you guys want to hear about the carbon credit pipeline?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, this is a graphic that I showed Sally. This is why you guys asked me to come talk. So I'll give it to you guys again. The carbon credit pipeline for nature-based solutions. This is particularly a rant about that. So this is what it looks like, and I'll explain it. So people plant trees, and then they grow the trees. Then they track the carbon, and they say how much carbon was in that tree. After that, they get a certified carbon credit, and then they sell it. And then somebody like an aluminum factory who can't change their business model will or somebody who just wants to do good will buy that credit and then retire it. So it's done. And then they say that is a full carbon credit. The problem is those are all the different parties in the market right now. And that's how they get along. They don't get along at all. And I'll tell you why. The first one is nonprofits, greenwashing, and government. So they're like, we're planting a gazillion trees, a trillion trees, whatever. They plant a lot of trees. They don't track them. They don't know if they live or they die. Sometimes the trees are non-native species or even invasive. A lot of times they're planted in grasslands instead of native forest lands. There's lots of problems with these. Indigenous and local peoples, and we're talking about small farmers in the Congo and the Amazon, people who own land, have lived there for centuries. They may or may not be involved in these projects. It might be occurring on their land without their permission. Sometimes they'll go in and uproot these trees. And even if they're doing an amazing job and want to help, they may or may not be able to speak the right language scientifically or just English in order to get their carbon credits certified and be taken seriously. Academics and news organizations are highly critical. We see an expose in The Guardian every week. But if you look at their projects, they're so small and they don't usually scale. And they're also very critical of the transaction end of the market, which is what funds early stage development. And so they tend to be combative towards the market overall. Web3, love them to death, but they have had some classic Web3 behavior, including fictional tree planting projects, highly suspect Ponzi schemes, and or splitting off the transaction end of the market. So they're basically taking an entirely separate pipeline out to consumer that may or may not be there. And they are not necessarily certifying their credits, so institutional buyers can't buy them, like airlines and such. The other problem is, I always ask everybody in Web3, who are you selling your carbon credit to? If you're selling it to like Shell or Chevron or an institutional buyer, great. If you're selling it to another naive consumer who then expects to sell it to somebody else, that's a Ponzi scheme. Now there are great players in Web3, but I'm critical of the market and its strategy decisions. Certifying bodies like Vera and Gold Standard tend to block the entire downstream pipeline. So they take all their money out of the projects as they're in development. The more they certify you, the more you have to pay them, up to $80,000 to certify a project, making small farmers and local people really excluded from the market. And then they also don't help you with sales at all. So you still have to go pay a private broker after you certify to sell your credits. Brokers are the worst. They take 60 to 90% of the margin out of the carbon credit market, which is a ridiculous amount in a hugely inefficient market. Most of the sales are private and done through good old boy networking. And finally, regulators are not standardizing credits. They have not moved very fast to make the market more transparent or equitable, or have buyers, for instance, pay for certifying or pretty much anything. And so as a result, pretty much everybody after a sale is sucking money out of project developments. And so this cycle has been very, very retroactively slowing development of nature-based solutions in particular. I can talk more about like what I think works.
I do have a question for you actually. What is your best Savimbo moment? Oh no, we've just lost you.
I'm back. You have a question.
You're back. Yeah, what is your best Savimbo moment?
Oh, I think it was so some of these guys are very non-materialistic. They haven't had a lot of money in the jungle, and they, the trees grow fruits, and it's in many ways it's a 5,000-year-old indigenous nation that was really never colonized. Like the Spaniards came up the road, but they didn't leave anything behind. And if you look on a global map, Colombia owns this area, but in reality, it's been held by autonomous indigenous people forever. And so money is different here, and the value of nature is so high here. Like how much of their identity is wrapped up in having a clean river behind them and a big tree in their front yard. That's what they do. It's who they are. It's not something they have to change. So I really like that. And then Johnny, my partner, you really can't pay him a lot of money. He doesn't want money. But I gave him a game camera to look at his Jaguar, and the look on his face, he had this like beatific, like child on Christmas morning face. That was like a really good moment for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. You know, I just love how you've simplified the world of carbon credits and just really explained just the climate, and what you're doing is just really, really special, and so grateful for you being here and sharing with us today.
Thanks. We're definitely a resource. I'll put our TikTok and our Twitter in, but I really think that the more we demystify climate, the better we're going to get at action.
Andrea, I'm only joining now that I came back in. What is it can we do to help you on this journey? All of us.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So first up, if anybody wants to subscribe to our farmers, they can go to sabinebo.com/clients, and $20 a month, you can subscribe to offset your personal footprint. We plant trees, you get biodiversity credits, you get some carbon credits, and most importantly, you make my farmers ridiculously happy. That's the first thing. If you are an institutional buyer, we will have our first certified tranche of credits available probably August. You can do pre-sales now, or you can buy after we hit the market. We do look for private buyers who are willing to pay extra for ecological benefits. My coolest thing right now, what I'm obsessed about, is this biodiversity credit. So we're developing a biodiversity credit. We're selling it to consumers, getting it certified, and putting it on international markets. And it's based on rare, endangered, sentinel, and umbrella species. So like a jaguar represents all of the species underneath it. If you can find the jaguar, then you can say pretty much all the other species are intact there. I'm really excited about that. We have an endangered bear, the jaguar, rare trees, and we track dragonflies, and all that together allows us to sell biodiversity credits.
So and where does the sexy trees that I keep seeing all over the place fit into this?
Oh my God. Okay. So that was, okay. Sorry to go all Valley Girl, but I was doing a pitch in Austin, and I shorted out on the stage. There was like 200 people staring at me. And I was like, if you're nice to me, I'll send you a sexy photo of a tree. Because I had just seen this hilarious photo of Johnny the day before. So that started the sexy tree thing. So we do a sexy tree every Thursday. If you subscribe to us, you can be on our mailing list, and we'll send you a sexy tree. They are very sexy. Our policy is that humans are not the only sexy species on the planet. And when you really know what to look for in a tree, like there's some really beautiful trees.
Listen, I am like
hilarious. Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Can I tell you, I am a tree hugger. So when I saw that, it caught my eyes, and I go, there's somebody else that notices a sexy tree other than me.
There's just like roots and bears. There's like visual orgasms that trees have, because they like when they reproduce, like the colors that trees put out and stuff is like, yeah. Anyway, so you can go to our website, sabinebo.com, subscribe to a sexy tree, and we will send you one every week. I personally think it's the highlight of my week, because I just get this email and I'm just like, oh, I hear so much crap about climate. Just seeing a sexy tree, I'm just like, okay, something good is happening.
But I just say, my husband's already very enamored, because I have the tendency to hug trees, and now I know why.
Yes, we do accept sexy tree photo submissions. So we've had a few urban sexy trees. I think I think sexy tree is a bit in the eye of the tree beholder, but yeah, and we have a friends section, so we have a list of things you can do if you just want to do something small, like Google reviews help, Twitter followers help, all that stuff helps. We have a lot of friends, and I think the friendship, the amistad, or sorry, in Spanish it's amistad. The Buddhists call it Maitri, like M-A-I-T-R-I. It's like this divine idea of friendship. We have so many friends around the world, and that really has led to some really great stuff, especially for our farmers who've been fighting the good fight for too long alone.
I have a question for everyone in the audience to type in. Who is exploring and implementing a carbon credit strategy in their company right now? Any of you? And then the next question I have for Drea is, Drea, what are you guys doing anything around COP28 that we should know about?
I think we may or may not be involved as panelists on a couple of things. We didn't have any specific events planned. We normally avoid climate conferences, but we made an exception for COP28 in particular, because we're huge fans of Dubai, Saudi Arabia, their action towards climate. And yeah, and we have partnerships there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Are there any other questions pending from anyone before admin wraps up on our next session? Well, our session number 1, that's session number 3, is going to get started. Has Risha come in yet, guys? Team, is Risha here?
She said she will be joining 5 minutes before.
Okay, perfect. So in a couple of minutes. Drea, is there anything you want to leave and add for anyone as we wrap up these last 3 minutes?
Yeah, I can give you guys some more. So I talked about nature-based solutions. I can talk to you a little bit about some of the interesting stuff we learned putting a project in on the ground. You guys want to know? Okay. One of the things we learned, we've watched a lot of carbon credit projects, and there's this concept of carbon colonialism. So in order to not reproduce colonial behavior, we put a few rules in for ourselves. And I will say that if you're looking at carbon credit projects, you should look at these rules and see if they've been implemented. It will help you really differentiate between projects that are good grassroots projects and community driven versus projects that are external and more like corporate or even exploitive. So the first rule we have is hire local. So we don't think you need a foreign workforce in order to run a good carbon credit project. We do think that locals need technology and training. And so part of our ecotourism program, which is circular, is to bring people in for training. So they come in as tourists, they pay their way. But while they're there, they train locals on and leave tools and training behind. The second rule is that technology should promote culture. So we do realize we're changing local populations by implementing advanced technology. And it's very important to us that we use technology as a tool to retain cultural knowledge. So this is Davidson. He's an indigenous youth. He speaks the Kofan language, which is a small group mostly in Ecuador, and one of the many rich natural languages here. And so he's putting a Kofan language recording on with an iPhone onto videos done by game camera by Johnny. And Johnny's an elder in the Pasto Indian tradition. And so they're not only transferring knowledge about animals, but they're using technology to do it and also store some of that priceless information. The last one is that we think it's really important to create careers around climate. I don't think we have enough time for everybody to go get a degree or a PhD. So we do a lot of what we would call a trade school. So this is our staff. They're doing a forestry apprenticeship. We teach them topography, drone, silviculture, and species identification. And the whole idea is to get them the tools and the experience to go find jobs in climate afterwards. And then the last one is we strongly believe, and I'm very bullish about this, that especially in tropical forests where land rights have been debated for centuries, like the Congo, like the Amazon, that land needs to be owned by the locals. So Savimbo, as a corporate policy, we never ask to buy land. We rent everywhere we stay, and we always work to help get locals get their own land rights, and we consider ourselves guests who are there to trade instead of people who are there to buy and retire. And then I think the last one is you can do good and make a profit at the same time. It's not one or the other anymore, and I think the assumption that it has hurt us a lot as a species.
There's a question for you, Drea. Thank you for that. And I love those rules. And as you're right, as simplistic, I've done a lot of work down in the Caribbean with my foundation, and you are so correct that it makes a huge difference of being a foreign entity and foreign person going there and everything is not local versus to really making the entire content and the thread of it to be local. And you are a guest and you leave. Right? Your job is, if you actually do it really well, you're supposed to leave.
Yeah, I realized the end of economic colonialism, the opposite of it was fair trade.
Yeah.
And I felt very welcome here. I've been working for about a year, but I do change location. I make sure that I'm always paying a local landlord, and I've never asked to buy land. And that's a huge part, because these guys have fought so hard to have access to their own land that when you can come here and you've got proportionally ridiculously amounts of money compared to them. They cannot economically compete with that. And so I'm very careful to not practice what would be a normal standard of living in the US is conspicuous consumerism here. So I made my lifestyle a lot simpler too. There's a lot of elements, and we include all that training and all of that with our ecotourism program, because it's important to us to find a way to collaborate, because when you collaborate as equals, you can do a lot more.
So explain to everyone here how you sometimes, like, how are you here having this talk with us with internet tonight? Because I'm sure you're sitting somewhere in a forest somewhere.
I'm in what is a very nice house in the Colombian Amazon. You can see the rainforest behind me and the river, and then satellite internet. Thank God, technology has changed a lot when it comes to access, which is why I think it's really possible to have these kind of collaborations now. You can be more efficient about carbon capture. You can work directly with local populations, and if you have the right kind of DNA in your business model, you can be a lot more effective at stopping deforestation.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. Okay. We have a question for you. There's a large number of TEPCOs who want to switch into climate tech. How can they upskill on pressing topics to be considered for open rules? You want to take
I will say there's a do and a don't. I do like Terra.do, I think it's called. They have like those small training programs and networking opportunities for jobs. I do know of another climate job site that is only funded by a VC who will only match people with companies in their portfolios. So I would recommend against that one. If you write me, I'll tell you which one it is. But I do think more people, especially in this area of science, the barrier to switching careers should be reduced. The need to have a degree in something should be less important than the ability to take action. So
I love that. I love that. I love that. The ability to take action versus the need for a degree. Wow.